what aspects of Management 3.0 do you find to be particularly useful?
I'd say it's understanding why that tension exists between that what should be fantastic workplace ideology of people first, right? Corporate mission, vision, we're all in it together, collaboration, rah, rah. And then there's the reality of the workplace. I heard somebody refer to it as the shadow organization, which is how work actually gets done, which is always so different from the formal hierarchies. And that tension was always something that people knew intuitively, but nobody ever really talked about away from formal channels. They always talked about it. So Management 3.0, I just calls it out at the beginning of the class. It says, hey guys, all these leadership practices and project management practices started in the Industrial Revolution, and a lot of folks are still using them today. And that's why there's tension, because with knowledge work, it requires a whole different way of motivating people than it did from back in the industrial days, a whole different way of leading people. It's all about managing the system and not the people. Whereas in the industrial era, when it really was a matter of life and death, you had all these uneducated farmers coming in to do the city jobs. It made sense to have a top-down command and control structure. So you could say, hey, Billy, don't do that or you will die, which is very different from creative knowledge work when creativity in itself requires variation, right? And so standardizing everything really minimizes the odds of anything being innovative. So I'm excited to see a program that not only calls it out, but it gives it a language and it teaches the science behind it, the complexity thinking, even little bits of behavioral economics to help give a clear understanding that this isn't just a way to validate rethinking our corporate command and control structure. It's empirically based and it's the foundation of Agile. And guess what? Software engineers have been doing it since the 90s. And so there's a ton of formal and informal anecdotal and university-based research to support it, and to really experience that way of doing business and then to understand the mindset shift that comes with it has been absolutely transformational. It's what I was looking for while I was in a formal HR role in learning and development. I was helping teams, but I didn't have the toolkit that I now have, that I've learned about Agile and especially Management 3.0, how to really be a leader in an Agile space.
How do you
Sorry.
How do you go into a situation where an organization says, well, this is how we've always done it? Because you talked about the industrial way of doing things, right? The assembly line sort of way of doing things. And most of us as human beings like comfort. We like to be in a comfort zone and we like to say, I know exactly what's expected of me. And as long as my basic needs are met, then that's fine. So how would you explain to someone in a tactful way that what they're doing isn't working if they don't even understand that what they're doing isn't working?
I find that there are a lot of aha moments simply by starting to map out their processes. There's a game I love to play with organizations. It's called the Getting Ready for the Morning game. And it's fabulous because you invite participants to individually map out each activity that they do from the moment their alarm goes off all the way to them getting into their car to head to work. And they all do that individually on little Post-its. And then they get together and they line the Post-its on the wall to look at and compare and contrast all the different ways that people in their team get ready for work. And then they organize them according to different activity themes. And what emerges then as they see the patterns is a flow of activity that they use to work themselves through the process of getting out the door. All that to say is when an organization then is encouraged to follow up with, let's do that for your team's flow of work, because just like you had these great aha moments doing this activity, let's dive into your team's workflow and understand it. And that'll eventually lead them to a Kanban board very naturally, saying, awesome, we just mapped out your flow. Check it out. We can capture it beautifully on this board that helps you trace through the flow of work. And what's even better is because you guys are solving problems and having a lot of ideas, this helps you keep track of the flow of these ideas through the different processes. and bringing them through seeing different redundancies in their process. So really focusing on process improvement from the knowledge work perspective, teaching them about the work in progress limits. Kanban is such a beautiful way to start. And then through that getting ready in the morning exercise, when you challenge them, okay, let's say you only had 15 minutes to get ready. You guys as a team decide which activities are the most critical for you getting out the door. That introduces them to the idea of iterative work. So instead of me saying what you're doing is wrong, you give them a feel and experience of what it's like to function agile in a way that relates to everyone getting ready in the morning. And then what I've seen is by the end of the activity, people are like, oh my gosh, yes, let's map out our work processes. This is great. And you're right, there are some projects that could benefit from this more iterative way of working. I can see these other tasks being mapped on the board. And having then introduced them to that mindset and showing them what it's like to have then some experiments with trying out different ways of managing that flow of work through the morning, which again translates into when I work with them to map out their overall processes, they get really excited and they almost don't realize they're being agile. And I could even minimize the jargon. You can call it like the workflow board, but it's helping them to see that there is an alternative. And since people naturally self-organize, because we're all part of a system, when you catch them self-organizing on their own and then tell them what they're doing, it's so much more powerful because then they can compare and contrast in their own minds like, whoa, I never thought about approaching work this way. And wow, this helps make what was all stuck inside of our heads so much more explicit. So now we can talk about and renegotiate the system instead of get frustrated and have, get emotional with each other. We can say, okay, what can we do different? How can we capture this more effectively on this, visual workflow board, Kanban board, whatever jargon they're ready to really work with. I hope that answered your question.
No, it's great. I think it's really exciting. People get intimidated if you say you're about to be agile or you're about to do this thing, and then they go, I'm not ready. Or if you just have them start doing it and don't tell them that they're doing it, and then you just say, hey, by the way, you just did this.
Yes.
And all of a sudden people, it's the same thing with little kids with food, right? If you tell a little kid that they're eating Brussels sprouts or something, they're just immediately going to say, oh, I don't like Brussels sprouts because it's not a chicken nugget or something, right? And so if you just say, here, eat this, and then they like it, and then later you say what it is, it's funny how people like something, and then once you tell them what it is, they don't like it afterwards. I find that to be really fascinating, which we don't have to get into that too much, but
they really like
same idea.
At least once they realize this is being agile. Oh, yeah, we actually need this.
So you were talking about the power of applying a Kanban board to an organization. How do you use Management 3.0 in your personal life on a daily basis? And how would you recommend for someone to apply Management 3.0, maybe some of the principles of the program or even other Agile ideas? How would you suggest for someone to jump in and start learning if they're the kinesthetic type, such as myself?
Yeah, so just to address like what you said about the Kanban board, that's just really if an organization's like curious about Agile and not sure what sacred cows they're willing to get rid of, it's a fabulous experience where then you could also say, hey, what you're doing right now is self-organizing, which is huge. Hey, look what happened just there. Susie stepped up and she just took the informal role of a leader, which is awesome. And what that means is next time you have opportunities to self-organize, you guys could even rotate who gets to play what role depending on who sometimes you don't usually hear from or who needs some more opportunities to step up and grow, which actually ties into Management 3.0, which is all about recognizing how our everyday work creates tremendous opportunities for personal and professional development. Because when and I've heard some people call it swarm, and that's what happens with that activity. You allow them to swarm with their Post-its. And me, the facilitator, is similar to like the business giving the what and the why, where the team figures out the how. And that team figuring out the how is a huge opportunity for, again, personal and professional development to happen. And the role of the leader in that case is to guide the team through asking questions. Like, how did that feel right now? Or hey, I noticed this. What are your thoughts on? Maybe, if Susie's been really leading hardcore for 10 minutes, you're like, hey, Susie, what are your, who else haven't we heard from? How could you invite other people's perspectives? Let's take a moment to think. And when it comes to applying it to everyday life, it really is, number one, looking for, in a similar way, those everyday opportunities that I have personally to learn and develop. And instead of that mindset where I am part of a system that I have no control over, and it is the man's job to make sure I get my needs met, it really feels so good to, again, acknowledge how humans naturally self-organize. It's an emergence. Life is this exciting adventure that I can self-educate on. And I knew that before, but that experimental mindset piece that Management 3.0 really hits home was so tremendously valuable, because I didn't realize how much that notion of perfectionism, which when you have that deterministic hierarchical structured work, where back in the days of construction, manufacturing, and transportation was the areas of focus of being innovated at the time with structures and processes, it really was you really were able to have that predictability to say, I want to get to C, I know what C looks like, and I know I have to go through B to get there. Start at A, go to B, get to C. And we know that life isn't like that, especially in knowledge work. And the Agile principle that really, or not principle, but the Agile really values the experimental mindset, which means getting rid of that notion of perfectionism and saying, okay, I have a rough idea of what I want the ideal state to look like, and I'm going to do some experiments to see if I get either closer or farther away from that ideal state, and even allow for the fact that ideal state may change, and give myself that grace. And that's where I think the biggest impact is for me, and where people can have some valuable takeaways for themselves personally, is not only understanding their organization from a fresh perspective, but taking it onto that personal level where they can see life as this exciting adventure of opportunities for them to self-organize with their own tribes at home. I even have a Kanban board, or actually, I started using Scrum, where I didn't limit work in progress, but I started working in iterations. And then I found that switching to Kanban made more sense for me for the different projects I'm working on. So that's kind of fun too, is explaining that to organizations once they go through some sort of immersive experience and saying, this beautiful thing about Agile, here are the principles, here are the practices. It really is, as long as you're consistent with the principles and values, the practices you choose can look different for each organization. It's not one size fits all. So it's much closer to how life actually works. And that's what I absolutely love about the program, is that it's meaningful, not just from an organizational perspective, but also personally. And then all the different tools that come with it. It's a nonstop adventure of experimentation and even creating your own.
Yeah, and it's interesting to have a program that says we're going to give you a lot to chew on, and it doesn't have a silver bullet, right? In the Management 3.0, you don't show up and they say, we're going to fix your organization in 2 days, have a great life. It's more of, you're probably going to leave the workshop with more questions than you did before, but you're opening up that box of mindfulness, of getting people to really think about not just the what they're doing, but the how and the why. And I think that's a powerful part of that, right? Is that iteration. You said it a few times, but to have people be vulnerable enough to say, some things are good, some things are bad, that things aren't always good, things aren't always bad, that there's this wiggle room, which is called life, humanity.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm telling you what, it's amazing how the different games, they call it in Management 3.0, are transformative. The teams that I've introduced, even informally, to delegation poker, after hearing, for instance, some challenges an organization may be having, it's just like, why don't you try this? And by the way, you'll probably love this workshop coming up, because delegation poker, for instance, it helps you see that delegation is not just a binary thing, right? It's not just to delegate or not to delegate. That is the question. It's right. It really is that there are different levels of delegation, different levels to which you can authorize ownership over something. And it ranges from just saying, this is what we're going to do. No, doesn't matter what questions you have, we're going this way, all the way to, right, going through the ranges of from selling to then, from telling and then selling, saying, hey, this is what we're going to do and this is why. And then consulting, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but I'm going to ultimately make the decision. And then agreeing, saying, hey, team, this is up to us. We're going to just work our way through it. And then you've got the report back what you end up landing on. I'm going to share with you what I recommend, but it's your job, team, to make that decision. And then you've got, hey, team, it's your job to make the decision and report back to me. I'm not even going to give you any advice. And then the final level, number 7, which is go and do it. I just trust you. And we all know that, especially if you have a background like me in middle management, it's terrifying to delegate, especially if you have really eager folks who are new to the workplace who want to add value, but they've got a lot of development to go through. And what delegation poker helps you do is negotiate through the different decisions that need to be made, the levels of authority people want in that decision-making process. And it invites a conversation around it where the team may say, just let us have the total freedom and trust us. And then you could say, well, let's work our way towards that. Right now, I'm feeling more comfortable with consulting, and this is why. Because we're a new team, we're still getting to know each other. This is a huge, risky project. So, that conversation's huge because that way people get to know where they stand. And that's where these games, I feel like the game could have such the term game can have baggage, right? Because you're thinking like Yahtzee or, or the next 4. But no, these are fabulous structured ways that invite critical conversations. So I see it like this, Drew. You could either send your team to months or even years of soft skills training and hope they'll organically have these conversations, or you could whip out a delegation poker deck. Have those hard conversations now in a way that any team is absolutely ready for, because you can then talk through what's on people's minds. You can be explicit about the boundaries that people have in terms of their authority, and they know that you're working towards developing them as leaders to have that full delegative authority that'll help prepare them in their career. So what we will be teaching in Management 3.0 and what they as an organization put together is such a tremendous collection of activities like that I believe can save organizations hundreds of thousands of dollars in training costs from those soft skill trainings. Bring it to Management 3.0, learn some of these ways of getting your teams to have these critical conversations organically, and your team will transform, 100% guaranteed.